My husband's face turned ashen when he walked into the hospital gala and saw my name on the building. Just 6 months earlier, he had moved his 27-year-old mistress into our home while I was undergoing my 3rd round of chemotherapy, convinced I wouldn't survive to see another Christmas. He never expected to find me not only alive, but thriving, watching as the same doctors who saved my life unveiled the new oncology research center bearing my name. The journey from betrayal to triumph wasn't what I expected, but it revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn leaves created a kaleidoscope of color across our 5-acre property as I stood at the kitchen window, watching the gardener prepare our landscaping for winter. The estate had been featured in 3 home design magazines, a modern farmhouse masterpiece according to Architectural Digest. From the outside, everything about my life appeared picture perfect, a showcase of achievement, taste, and success. At 42, I had built what most would consider an enviable life. I was Olivia Mercer, the founder and CEO of a thriving wellness app with over 3 million active users. My husband, Carter, had become one of the most sought-after neurosurgeons on the East Coast. Our 15-year marriage was considered a model partnership by our social circle, 2 ambitious professionals who had managed to build extraordinary careers while maintaining what appeared to be a rock-solid relationship. The sprawling farmhouse in Greenwich, Connecticut, had been our shared project, transformed from a neglected property into a showplace that reflected both our aesthetics, his preference for clean lines and minimal design balanced by my love of organic textures and warm, inviting spaces. We had spent countless weekends selecting every finish, debating the merits of various architectural choices, and celebrating each completed phase with champagne picnics on the floor of newly renovated rooms. I turned from the window and winced, slightly, pressing my hand against my side where a persistent ache had been bothering me for weeks. I'd been ignoring it, attributing the discomfort to too many hours hunched over my laptop during our app's latest update launch. Carter had noticed my occasional grimaces and suggested I have it checked, but with back-to-back investor meetings and an upcoming speaking engagement at a tech conference in San Francisco, I had pushed it to the bottom of my priority list. "You've been holding that spot for 5 minutes," Carter observed as he entered the kitchen, his voice carrying that gentle but authoritative tone he had perfected through years of delivering both good and difficult news to patients. He set his coffee mug down and moved toward me, his brow furrowed with professional concern. "This isn't normal, Liv. You need to get it checked." I waved dismissively, an automatic response honed through years of pushing through obstacles. "It's just stress tension. After the conference next week, I'll book a massage." Carter's expression shifted into what I privately called his doctor face, the slightly detached, analytical look he adopted when switching from husband to medical professional. "Promise me you'll let me book you an appointment with Elaine. She can fit you in tomorrow morning before your first meeting." Dr. Elaine Cho was our longtime friend and my primary care physician. The fact that Carter was suggesting an immediate appointment rather than waiting until after my conference triggered a small flutter of concern beneath my practiced composure. "Fine," I conceded. "But just to prove it's nothing." Carter nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'm sure it is, but better to rule things out." The next morning, sitting in Elaine's softly lit examination room, I maintained my busy executive persona, answering her questions while responding to emails on my phone. When she pressed against the tender spot on my right side, the sharp pain caught me off guard, causing me to inhale sharply. Elaine's expression remained neutral, but I recognized the slight tightening around her eyes, the same look Carter got when something didn't align with his expectations. "I'd like to run some tests," she said, her tone deliberately casual in a way that immediately raised my internal alarms. "Just to be thorough." "What kind of tests?" I asked, finally setting my phone down. "Blood work today, and I'd like to schedule an ultrasound and CT scan. She maintained eye contact, her gaze steady and professional. It could be several things, most of them minor, but I want a complete picture. I nodded, my mind already rearranging my schedule to accommodate these unexpected appointments. How soon do you need to do these? Today, if possible. I've already called ahead to the imaging center. The urgency in her response cut through my executive efficiency. For the first time, I felt a ripple of genuine fear beneath my carefully maintained control. You think it's serious? It wasn't a question, but Elaine answered anyway. I think it warrants immediate investigation. Let's get the data before we draw conclusions. Data. Conclusions. The language of analysis and problem solving. Familiar territory that allowed me to compartmentalize the growing unease. I nodded, briskly, and reached for my phone. I'll have Marissa reschedule my morning. The following days passed in a blur of medical appointments and procedures. Carter accompanied me to each one, leveraging his professional status to expedite results and consult directly with specialists. His presence was both comforting and concerning. Each time he stepped away to speak privately with a colleague, my anxiety spiked, although outwardly I maintained the composed facade that had served me through countless business crises. 1 week after my initial appointment with Elaine, we sat together in a consultation room at Greenwich Memorial Hospital. Dr. Nevin Patel, head of oncology, sat across from us, several scans displayed on the screen behind him. Carter held my hand, his grip tighter than necessary, already understanding the medical terminology that Dr. Patel was carefully translating for my benefit. The mass on your liver is approximately 7 centimeters, Dr. Patel explained, his voice gentle but direct. The biopsy confirms it's hepatocellular carcinoma, primary liver cancer. The concerning aspect is that we're seeing several smaller lesions as well, indicating it has begun to spread. I listened with strange detachment, as if he were describing someone else's condition. The word cancer seemed to hang in the air between us, distorting everything around it like a heavy object bending space. What's the treatment plan? I asked, my business mind automatically moving to next steps and action items. Dr. Patel seemed slightly taken aback by my directness, but quickly recovered. Given the size of the primary tumor and the presence of satellite lesions, we're looking at a combined approach. Surgery isn't the first option in this case. We'll want to start with targeted chemotherapy to reduce the tumor burden, then evaluate surgical options. Timeline? I pressed, mentally calculating project deadlines and company obligations. Carter's hand tightened over mine. Liv, he said softly, a note of warning in his voice. Dr. Patel leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Mercer, I want to be very clear about this. We need to begin treatment immediately. This is an aggressive form of cancer, and at this stage, we're looking at a challenging road ahead. Your immediate priority needs to be your health. The gravity in his tone finally penetrated my professional armor. I swallowed hard, feeling the controlled world I had built begin to tremble at its foundations. What are the survival statistics? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Carter interjected. Statistics don't apply to individuals, Liv. Every case is unique. It was the careful evasion of someone who knew the numbers weren't favorable. I fixed my gaze on Dr. Patel. I manage data for a living, doctor. I need to understand what we're facing. Dr. Patel nodded, respecting my approach. With stage 3, hepatocellular carcinoma that has begun to spread beyond the primary site, 5-year survival rates are approximately 30%. However, he continued, holding up a hand to forestall my response, those numbers reflect all patients, including those who delay treatment or have other complicating factors. You're otherwise healthy, younger than many patients with this diagnosis, and we have access to several clinical trials showing promising results for your specific cancer profile. 30%. The number echoed in my mind, a statistical, probability that suddenly defined my existence. In business, I would never pursue a project with only a 30% chance of success. Yet here I was, faced with odds I couldn't simply refuse to accept. Carter was speaking now, asking detailed questions about treatment protocols, potential clinical trials, side effect management. His voice sounded distant, though he was right beside me. I found myself studying his profile as he engaged with Dr. Patel, the determined set of his jaw, the focused intensity in his eyes, the slight furrow between his brows that appeared whenever he was deeply concentrating. Would this be the expression I'd see throughout my illness? This professional, problem-solving focus? Or would there be moments when my husband would emerge from behind the doctor, showing the vulnerability and fear that must exist beneath his clinical understanding? As we left the consultation room, Carter's arm around my shoulders felt both protective and somehow performative, as if he were already settling into a role he had observed countless times, the supportive spouse of a cancer patient. I wondered fleetingly if I was being unfair, projecting my own shock and fear onto his genuine concern. "We'll get through this," he said as we walked to the car, the autumn sunshine creating a jarring backdrop to the darkness of our new reality. "I'll contact some colleagues who specialize in hepatic oncology, get additional opinions on the best treatment approach." I nodded, still processing. "I need to speak with the board, arrange for interim leadership at the company." Carter squeezed my shoulder. "Let's take tonight to process before making any decisions. Dr. Patel said we have a little time to develop the optimal treatment strategy." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "But not much time. You heard him. This is aggressive. We need to move quickly." Something flickered across Carter's face, a flash of what might have been fear or grief, quickly masked by professional resolution. "We will, I promise, but proper planning will give us the best chance of success." As we drove home through the picturesque Connecticut countryside, I gazed out at the familiar landscape transformed by my diagnosis. The same trees that had seemed vibrantly beautiful this morning now appeared to be in a state of elegant decline, their brilliant colors the final flare of life before winter's dormancy. Would this be my final autumn? The question formed and dissolved in my mind as I tried to grasp the new reality reshaping my carefully planned life. Carter drove in silence, one hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze mine, each touch feeling like a message neither of us yet knew how to articulate. At home, I stood once again at the kitchen window, looking out at our manicured property. The gardener had finished his work, the grounds now perfectly prepared for the coming winter. Everything in its place, organized and controlled, exactly as I had always managed my life. But inside me, cells were multiplying in chaotic rebellion, defying the orderly existence I had constructed through discipline and determination. For the first time in my adult life, I faced a challenge that couldn't be overcome through sheer will, strategic planning, or hard work. As the sunset painted our perfect home in hues of gold and amber, I felt Carter's arms encircle me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "We have options," he murmured. "Advanced treatments, specialists, clinical trials. If anyone can beat this, it's you, Liv." I leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence while wondering if his confidence was genuine or a necessary fiction we would both maintain. 30%, I whispered. His arms tightened around. Numbers for other people, not for you." In that moment, I chose to believe him, clinging to the conviction in his voice like a lifeline. We stood together watching darkness gradually claim our perfect world, neither of us yet understanding how completely everything was about to change, or how the truest test of our marriage would come, not from the cancer cells multiplying in my body, but from choices neither of us could yet imagine making. The perfect life we had crafted together was about to be revealed for what it truly was. A beautiful illusion built on assumptions that would not survive the crucible of serious illness. but standing there in our showcase kitchen, wrapped in my husband's arms, I couldn't yet see that the destruction of that illusion would ultimately lead not to an ending, but to an unexpected new beginning. One far more authentic and meaningful than the picture-perfect existence now slipping through, our fingers like the autumn leaves swirling across our impeccable lawn. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The initial shock of my diagnosis crystallized into action with remarkable speed. Within a week, my treatment plan was established. An aggressive chemotherapy regimen using a combination of drugs that Dr. Patel described as the gold standard for hepatocellular carcinoma, supplemented by participation in a promising clinical trial at Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan. I approached cancer with the same methodical efficiency I'd applied to building my company. My executive assistant, Marissa, cleared my calendar and organized a digital folder containing everything from treatment schedules to nutritional guidelines. My COO, James Chen, seamlessly stepped into an interim leadership role, maintaining daily video conferences with me when my energy permitted. The board expressed unanimous support, approving an indefinite medical leave while assuring me my position would be waiting, regardless of how long recovery took. Carter leveraged his professional connections to assemble what he called the dream team, specialists from across the country who consulted on my case, offering opinions and suggestions that he meticulously compiled and evaluated. His dedication was impressive, his medical expertise invaluable in navigating the complexities of treatment options. If he sometimes seemed more like my physician than my husband during these discussions, I attributed it to his training and his determination to ensure I received optimal care. The first chemotherapy session took place on a Tuesday morning in early November. The oncology floor at Greenwich Memorial featured soothing colors, comfortable recliners, and large windows overlooking a Japanese-inspired garden. Carter had arranged for a private room, a privilege of his hospital standing, though I had initially resisted the isolation from other patients. "You'll appreciate the privacy," he insisted, his hand resting protectively on my shoulder as a nurse, named Sophia, prepared the IV line that would deliver the powerful drugs into my body. As the clear liquid began flowing through the tube, I experienced a surreal moment of disconnect, watching a substance powerful enough to stop liver cell replication enter my bloodstream, while outwardly appearing as innocent as saline. Sophia explained each medication as she administered it, her calm professionalism somehow anchoring me to reality when everything else felt increasingly untethered. "Dr. Mercer, we have rounds starting in 20 minutes. A young resident appeared at the doorway, addressing Carter with obvious deference. I saw the conflicted look cross Carter's face, his professional responsibilities pulling against his desire to remain with me. "Go," I told him, summoning a reassuring smile. "I have Sophia and my laptop. I'll be fine." Carter hesitated, his expression shifting between roles: husband, doctor, department head. "I'll be back as soon as rounds are completed," he promised, kissing my forehead before following the resident. He didn't return. 3 hours later, as Sophia disconnected the IV and provided detailed instructions for managing potential side effects, my phone chimed with a text from Carter. "Emergency surgery. Teenager with traumatic brain injury. I'll send Devin to drive you home. Rest. I'll check in when I can." Devin, Carter's personal assistant, arrived promptly, a young man in his early 30s, whose efficient courtesy remained strictly professional as he helped me to the car and drove me home. I was grateful for his discretion, as the first waves of nausea had begun rolling through me, making conversation impossible. At home, I managed to reach the master bathroom before violently emptying the contents of my stomach. The intensity of the reaction caught me off guard. I had researched side effects extensively, but academic understanding proved poor preparation for the physical reality. Between bouts of vomiting, I fumbled with the anti-nausea medication Sophia had provided, eventually managing to keep a pill down long enough for it to provide marginal relief. Hours passed in a haze of sickness and exhaustion. The master bathroom floor became my world, cool marble against my feverish skin as I moved between the toilet and the shower, trying to wash away the clinging sensation of illness. Eventually, I managed to drag myself to bed, collapsing onto the custom organic mattress that Carter and I had spent weeks selecting for its perfect balance of support and comfort. The irony of such careful attention to physical wellness while cancer cells multiplied in my body was not lost on me. Even through the fog of medication and nausea, Carter returned after midnight. I registered his presence through semi-consciousness, the careful way he eased into bed, his hand briefly touching my forehead to check for fever, the soft sigh as he settled beside me without disturbing my precarious comfort. I wanted to ask about the surgery, to offer comfort for what must have been a difficult case, but my body refused to cooperate, pulling me back into uneasy sleep before I could form the words. Morning brought marginal improvement. I awoke to find Carter already dressed in fresh scrubs, placing a glass of water and my morning medications on the nightstand. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his clinical gaze assessing me. "Like I've been hit by a pharmaceutical truck," I managed, my voice raspy from yesterday's ordeal. A flash of sympathy crossed his features. "The first treatment is often the hardest. Your body doesn't know what's happening yet." He checked his watch, a subtle movement but one I didn't miss. "I've arranged for a home health nurse to check on you today. Rebecca will be here at 10. I've got back-to-back surgeries, but I'll call between cases." I nodded, too exhausted to ask for more, though some quiet part of me had hoped he might adjust his schedule, at least after this first treatment. "Go save lives," I said, summoning a weak smile. "I'll be fine." Rebecca proved to be a blessing, an experienced oncology nurse with gentle hands and a no-nonsense attitude that somehow made the humiliating aspects of cancer care more bearable. Under her guidance, I managed to shower, change into fresh pajamas, and migrate to the living room sofa, where the view of bare trees swaying against a steel-gray November sky provided a hypnotic distraction from persistent nausea. As promised, Carter called between surgeries, his voice rushing through questions about my symptoms and medication compliance before being called away for his next procedure. I found myself studying the call duration afterward. 3 minutes and 27 seconds. The pattern established that first treatment day continued through November and into December. My life narrowed to the rhythm of chemotherapy, side effects, and brief recoveries before the next cycle began. Carter maintained his full surgical schedule, attending my treatments when they didn't conflict with his operating room commitments, which proved to be approximately 1 session in 3. "Your husband is very dedicated to his patients," Sophia remarked during my 4th treatment, her tone carefully neutral as she adjusted my IV. "He's the best in his field," I replied automatically, the response practiced from years of charity, galas and hospital fundraisers. Sophia's eyes met mine briefly, something unspoken passing between us before she nodded. "You're looking stronger today. The nausea management seems to be working better." The observation was accurate. While still debilitating, the treatments had become somewhat more predictable, allowing me to develop coping strategies for the worst side effects. My body, always responsive to discipline and determination, seemed to be adapting to the chemical. Assault with the same resilience I'd applied to marathon training in my 30s. The cancer, however, proved less cooperative than my body's side effect management. Mid-December brought a progress scan that showed minimal reduction in the primary, tumor and concerning growth in several satellite lesions. "We need to adjust the protocol," Dr. Patel explained during a consultation that Carter attended virtually, joining via video conference from a medical symposium in Chicago. "I'd like to add targeted therapy alongside a more aggressive chemotherapy combination." I nodded, absorbing the setback with outward calm while inwardly recalculating my survival odds. "What are the additional side effects?" "Significant," Dr. Patel admitted. The fatigue will likely increase substantially. Hair loss is virtually certain with this combination. We'll need to monitor liver and kidney function more frequently, and there's increased risk of neuropathy. On the screen of my tablet, Carter's expression remained professionally composed as he asked detailed questions about dosages and timing. Only someone who had shared his bed for 15 years would recognize the slight tightening around his eyes that signaled internal stress. "I should be there for this," he said when the consultation concluded, his voice carrying clearly through the tablet speaker. "I can catch a flight back tonight." "Don't be ridiculous," I countered, falling into our familiar pattern of mutual professional support. "The symposium is important. I'm not starting the new protocol until next week anyway." He seemed to accept this with suspicious readiness. "If you're sure, I'll be back Sunday night." That evening, alone in our too-large house, I stood before the bathroom mirror, studying my reflection with clinical detachment. 5 weeks of treatment had already transformed me. My face gaunt, skin sallow despite meticulous hydration and the expensive skincare regimen I maintained even through the worst days. My body, once toned from regular Pilates and carefully managed nutrition, had grown softer in some places, sharper in others, cancer redistributing my physical self into something increasingly unfamiliar. With steady hands, I reached for the professional-grade scissors I'd purchased in preparation for this moment. If hair loss was inevitable with the new protocol, I would meet it on my terms, not wait for clumps to appear on my pillow or clog the shower drain. Methodically, I cut away the shoulder-length blonde hair that had been highlighted and trimmed monthly at Manhattan's most exclusive salon, watching the strands fall into the sink like delicate straw. When Carter returned from Chicago, his reaction to my newly shorn head was a study in controlled emotion. He paused in the doorway of our bedroom, medical bag still in hand, his expression flickering between surprise, clinical assessment, and something that might have been grief. "You didn't wait," he said finally, setting his bag down carefully. "It was going to happen anyway," I replied, running a hand over the 1/4 inch of blonde that remained. This way, I chose the timing. He nodded, approaching slowly to place a kiss on my forehead. "It suits you, actually. Very Sigourney Weaver in Alien 3. The reference, a connection to our early dating days when we'd spent a rainy weekend, binge-watching the entire Alien franchise, sparked a moment of genuine connection, a brief reminder of the people we had been before cancer invaded our carefully constructed world. That momentary warmth made the discovery 3 days later all the more devastating. I hadn't intended to check Carter's messages. Despite the growing distance between us, I had maintained the boundaries of privacy we'd established years ago. But when his phone chimed repeatedly while he was in the shower, the screen illuminating with notifications from someone named Alessandra S., professional curiosity, rather than suspicion, prompted me to glance at the display. The preview text was unmistakable. "Missing you already. The apartment feels empty without you. When can you?" The message cut off there, but those few words cracked the foundation of trust our marriage had been built upon, with hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor, a side effect of chemotherapy, not emotion, I told myself. I picked up Carter's phone. His passcode hadn't changed since we'd shared it years ago, 071307, our wedding date. 3 attempts and the device unlocked, revealing a messaging thread that stretched back months, beginning shortly after my diagnosis. I scrolled through with the detached precision I applied to analyzing market research data, cataloging patterns and confirming conclusions with methodical thoroughness. The exchanges painted a complete picture. Alessandra Santiago, a pharmaceutical. Representative Carter had met through work, had evolved from professional contact to emotional confidant to lover in the span of my illness. The messages documented not just an affair, but the construction of a parallel life, discussions about restaurants they'd visited, weekend trips carefully aligned with my treatment schedule, intimate exchanges about fears and desires. Most devastating were the conversations about me, about my cancer, about my prognosis. The oncologist says the new protocol is high risk. Her liver function is already compromised. Carter, November 15th. How are you holding up? This must be so hard to watch. Alessandra, November 15th. Some days I feel like I'm losing her already. With you, I can breathe. Carter, November 16th. Each exchange revealed a husband seeking escape rather than facing our shared reality, finding comfort in new arms rather than supporting his wife through her darkest hours. The betrayal was comprehensive, extending beyond physical infidelity to something more fundamental, the abandonment of our partnership precisely when it should have been strongest. I replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it, returned to bed, and waited for Carter to emerge from the shower. When he did, towel wrapped around his waist and skin still damp, I studied him with new eyes, seeing not my husband of 15 years, but a stranger who had constructed an elaborate deception while I fought for my life. "How's Alessandra?" I asked, my voice steady despite the seismic disruption occurring within me. Carter froze, one hand still rubbing a towel over his hair. His expression shifted rapidly: shock, denial, calculation, resignation, before settling into something resembling shame. "Olivia," he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words, a rare occurrence for a man whose professional life demanded confident communication, even in crisis. "Don't bother denying it," I said, surprised by my own calm. "I've seen the messages." He sank onto the edge of the bed, maintaining careful distance between us. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" I countered. "Because what I think is that while I've been fighting cancer, you've been building a relationship with someone else. What I think is that you've been sharing details of my medical condition with her, discussing my prognosis as if I'm already gone. What I think is that you decided our marriage was terminal before my cancer even had a chance to be." Carter's composure cracked, his clinical detachment giving way to visible distress. "I didn't know how to handle this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward me, encompassing my illness, my changed appearance, the medical equipment that had become fixtures in our bedroom. "Every day I watch patients die. I tell families there's nothing more I can do, and suddenly it was happening in my own home." "So you created a backup life," I concluded for him, "a safety net for when this one became too painful." He didn't deny it, which was perhaps the only honesty left between us. "I never meant to hurt you." And yet, the words hung between us, requiring no elaboration. What followed was a conversation unlike any in our 15 years together, raw, unfiltered by professional courtesy or the careful negotiations of a long-term partnership. Carter spoke of his terror at potentially losing me, his inability to reconcile his professional identity as a healer with his powerlessness against my cancer. I acknowledged the loneliness of fighting illness while watching my husband emotionally withdraw, the creeping suspicion that I had become a patient rather than a partner in his eyes. "I'll end it," he offered eventually, though his tone lacked conviction. "We can work through this." I studied him, this brilliant surgeon whose hands had saved countless lives, this man who had stood beside me exchanging vows in a vineyard 15 years earlier, this stranger who had sought comfort in another woman's arms while I vomited away the poison meant to save me. "I don't think you can," I said finally. "End it, maybe, but not change the fact that when faced with my mortality, your instinct wasn't to draw closer, but to create an escape route." "That's not fair," he protested. "I've been here. I've arranged your treatment, consulted with specialists, managed your medications." "You've been my doctor," I corrected him, "not my husband." The distinction silenced him momentarily. When he spoke again, his voice had regained its professional steadiness. "What do you want to do?" The question was reasonable, practical. The same approach we'd applied to every major decision in our marriage. But the circumstances had moved beyond reason or practicality into territory we had no map for navigating. "I need time to think," I said. "And right now, I need to rest. I have treatment tomorrow." Carter nodded, clearly relieved to retreat to the familiar terrain of medical concerns. "The new protocol starts at 9. I've arranged to postpone my first surgery so I can be there." "Don't," I replied, the word sharper than intended. "I'd rather go alone." Hurt flashed across his features before resignation replaced it. He gathered clothes and necessities, preparing to relocate to one of our guest rooms without being asked. At the bedroom door, he paused. "Whatever you decide, I won't make this harder for you. Your recovery has to be the priority." After he left, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind cataloging options with the same strategic thoroughness I applied to business challenges. Divorce seemed the obvious response to infidelity, yet the practicalities were daunting. My health. Insurance came through Carter's hospital position. Our finances, while substantial, were extensively intertwined. Most significantly, I had neither the energy nor the emotional bandwidth to dismantle a marriage while simultaneously fighting cancer. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carter had created an escape plan from our marriage, while I now found myself without a viable exit strategy of my own. Cancer had not only attacked my body, but had systematically eliminated my options, leaving me dependent on the very person who had betrayed me. That night marked a turning point, not just in my marriage but in my approach to cancer itself. Until then, I had viewed my illness primarily as a medical challenge to overcome, an aggressive adversary requiring equally aggressive countermeasures. Now it became something more complex, a revelation of truth, a destroyer of illusions, and potentially a catalyst for a different kind of liberation than I had ever imagined. As dawn broke over our property, illuminating the winter-bare trees, with cold December light, I made two decisions that would alter the course of everything that followed. First, I would continue my treatment with redoubled determination, fighting not just for survival, but for the independence that survival would afford. Second, I would allow Carter to maintain his deception temporarily, giving myself time to develop the strategy and gather the resources I would need. The woman who had built a wellness empire from a simple app idea had not lost her capacity for strategic thinking, even as cancer cells multiplied in her liver. If anything, the betrayal had clarified my purpose, burning away the comfortable illusions that had obscured harder truths. I had been fighting cancer to return to my previous life. Now I would fight to create an entirely new one built on authenticity rather than appearance, on genuine connection rather than carefully maintained facades. The revelation of Carter's infidelity, devastating as it was, had provided an unexpected gift, absolute clarity about what mattered and what did not. As I finally drifted toward sleep, I felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the hurt and anger, a sense of possibility, of breaking free from constraints I hadn't even recognized until they were illuminated by betrayal. Cancer and infidelity had collided to create the perfect storm in my perfectly curated life. But storms, for all their destructive power, also clear paths that weren't visible before. In the ruins of what had been, I glimpsed the first faint outline of what might yet be, if I had the courage to pursue it and the strength to survive long enough to reach it. The days following my discovery of Carter's affair unfolded with surreal precision. On the surface, our interactions maintained a veneer of civility, Carter continuing his attentive medical oversight while respecting the emotional distance I had established. His guilt manifested in small gestures, gourmet meals delivered from my favorite restaurants, fresh flowers appearing in my bedroom, a cashmere blanket specially ordered for my chemotherapy sessions. I accepted these offerings without comment, storing away the knowledge that Carter expressed remorse through material gestures rather than emotional presence, information that would prove useful in the strategy gradually taking shape in my mind. My fifth chemotherapy session, the first under the new, more aggressive protocol, descended upon me with unprecedented ferocity. The combination of drugs designed to attack my resistant cancer cells seemed determined to destroy everything else. In their path as well, for 48 hours, I existed in a twilight realm of nausea, bone-deep fatigue, and mouth sores that made even water painful to swallow. Carter hovered on the periphery of this suffering, monitoring my vital signs, adjusting medications, consulting with Dr. Patel by phone when my fever spiked to concerning levels. His medical competence remained flawless, his emotional connection conspicuously absent. Each time he checked my temperature or administered anti-nausea medication, I noticed his gaze never quite meeting mine, his touch professional rather than intimate. On the third day, as I emerged from the worst effects into the hollow exhaustion that followed, Carter approached with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I need to discuss something with you," he began, perching on the edge of the bed at a careful distance. "It's about the clinical trial at Sloan Kettering." I pushed myself to sitting position, gathering strength to focus on his words rather than the persistent ringing in my ears, another side effect of the platinum-based chemotherapy. "The preliminary results are promising," he continued, his tone shifting to the measured cadence he used when delivering complex medical information. "But the trial is moving to its next phase, which requires more frequent treatments, 3 times weekly instead of once." The implications were immediately clear. Greenwich to Manhattan 3 times a week in my condition would be grueling, if not impossible. Yet the trial represented my best hope for survival, given the cancer's limited response to standard protocols. "I've been discussing options with the research team," Carter said, watching me closely. "They've agreed to include you in the continuation phase if we can ensure compliance with the treatment schedule." "And how exactly would we do that?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "We need to relocate temporarily to Manhattan. I've found a place, a fully furnished apartment in the Upper East Side, 10 minutes from the hospital. 2 bedrooms, doorman building, all the amenities you might need." The careful precision of his description suggested this wasn't a recent discovery, but a space already secured. I wondered fleetingly if Alessandra had helped select it, if perhaps she had already visited this apartment that was now being presented as my lifeline. "What about your surgical schedule?" I asked, watching his expression for tells. "I've arranged to reduce my caseload, focusing only on essential procedures. Most can be transferred to colleagues. For critical surgeries, I can commute from Manhattan as needed." The arrangement sounded reasonable, medically necessary, and thoroughly legitimate. Yet beneath the surface practicalities lurked questions that Carter seemed determined to avoid. Where his relationship with Alessandra fit into this new geographic configuration, how our marriage would function in this transitional space, what exactly he envisioned for our future beyond my treatment. "When would this move happen?" I asked, still evaluating options, angles, potential leverage. "Ideally, next week. Your first triple treatment would begin Monday." The timeline was aggressive but aligned with medical necessity. My most recent scans had shown concerning progression in several satellite lesions, reinforcing the urgent need for more effective intervention. Whatever personal chaos swirled around us, the cancer's relentless advance remained the primary threat. "I'll need time to arrange things with the company," I said, though in truth James had been handling operations so effectively that my involvement had become increasingly consultative rather than essential. Carter nodded, appearing relieved by what he clearly interpreted as acceptance of his proposal. "I'll finalize the arrangements. Devon can help with the logistics." As he turned to leave, I spoke again, my voice stronger than it had been in days. "Carter." He paused, looking back, with wary expectation. "I have conditions." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, that I would negotiate rather than simply acquiesce to medical necessity or concern about what those conditions might entail. Of course, he said carefully. Whatever you need. First, I'll use the second bedroom. We're not sharing a bed. He nodded, accepting this without protest. Whether from guilt or relief, I couldn't determine. Second, your relationship with Alessandra ends completely. No contact, professional or otherwise, for the duration of my treatment. This triggered a more visible reaction, a tightening around his eyes, a slight pallor beneath his tan. Olivia, I already told you I would end things. Saying and doing are different, I replied evenly. I'm not asking for promises. I'm establishing requirements for my cooperation with this arrangement. The shift in dynamic wasn't subtle. For weeks, I had been the patient, dependent on Carter's medical expertise and financial support. Now, despite my physical weakness, I was reclaiming agency, making his access to forgiveness conditional rather than automatic, establishing terms rather than accepting circumstances. Carter's expression revealed his recognition of this shift. What else? I need access to funds, separate from our joint accounts, separate from your oversight. A significant amount transferred to an account in my name only. This request visibly alarmed him more than the others. Why? You have the platinum card, the joint checking account. You've never had financial restrictions. I've also never discovered my husband was having an affair while I underwent chemotherapy. I countered, my tone remaining calm despite the subject matter. My condition has removed many choices, Carter. I'm not relinquishing financial autonomy as well. He studied me with the analytical gaze that had likely served him well in assessing patients' unstated concerns. How much? $2 million. Transferred before we relocate to Manhattan. The figure was calculated, substantial enough to provide genuine independence if needed, yet representing less than 10% of our combined net worth. Not a divorce settlement, but an insurance policy. Carter didn't argue about the amount, which told me everything about his guilt and his priorities. I'll make the arrangements tomorrow. Anything else? Yes. I held his gaze steadily. Complete transparency about my medical condition. No more discussions with colleagues about my prognosis without including me. No more decisions presented as fate's accomplice. I am a partner in my treatment, not a recipient of your expertise. This final condition seemed to affect him most deeply, touching the core of his identity as both doctor and husband. The lines between these roles had blurred during my illness, allowing him to retreat into professional detachment when emotional engagement became too painful. You're right, he said finally. That should have been true from the beginning. We regarded each other across the expanse of our king-sized bed, a distance that seemed both physical and metaphorical. In that moment, I recognized that regardless of whether our marriage ultimately survived, I had already begun the essential process of reclaiming myself from both cancer's tyranny and the constraints of a relationship built more on mutual accomplishment than genuine intimacy. I'll accept the Manhattan arrangement under these conditions, I said, making it clear that my agreement was conditional rather than capitulation. Carter nodded, relief and wariness competing in his expression. I'll take care of everything. The week that followed operated with military precision. Devon coordinated the logistics of our temporary relocation, arranging for essential belongings to be transported to the Manhattan apartment. Carter transferred the promised funds without discussion, the transaction appearing in my banking app with the simple notation, as agreed, C. The apartment proved to be exactly as described, an elegantly furnished two-bedroom on East 63rd Street, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city skyline. The building offered a 24-hour doorman, concierge service, and a private elevator that opened directly into the unit, amenities clearly selected with my compromised health in mind. What Carter hadn't mentioned was the apartment's previous occupant. As I explored the space while he consulted with the Sloan Kettering team, I discovered subtle evidence of Alessandra's presence, a distinctive perfume lingering in the master bathroom, a long dark hair caught in the drain, A women's magazine tucked beneath the living room coffee table. These traces confirmed what I had suspected. This hadn't been a hastily arranged medical necessity, but a space already secured for other purposes. I chose not to confront Carter with this knowledge immediately, adding it instead to the growing catalog of information I was assembling. Each discovery, painful as it might be, provided another piece in the strategic puzzle I was constructing, a comprehensive understanding of exactly what I was fighting for and against. The night before my first triple treatment, I sat alone by the apartment's wall of windows, watching Manhattan's lights create constellations against the December darkness. Below, the city pulsed with holiday energy, shoppers hurrying along, illuminated streets, tourists gathering at seasonal attractions, couples entering restaurants for celebratory dinners. Normal life continued its rhythm, while mine had been completely restructured around survival. Carter entered quietly, setting his medical bag on the console table. "Everything's arranged for tomorrow. Dr. Wilson will oversee the protocol personally." I nodded, still gazing at the city below. "When did you first bring Alessandra here?" The question hung in the air between us, its directness leaving no room for evasion. Carter remained by the entryway, maintaining physical distance that seemed appropriate given the emotional chasm between us. "October," he admitted finally. "After your diagnosis but before treatment began." The timing revealed premeditation rather than gradual transgression, a deliberate creation of alternate possibilities while publicly recommitting to our marriage through his role as my physician. The calculation behind this dual strategy struck me as more disturbing than the infidelity itself. "She won't be coming here again," he added, his tone suggesting this should provide reassurance. "No," I agreed, turning to face him directly. "She won't." The unspoken ultimatum beneath my words was clear. His continued access to possible reconciliation depended on absolute adherence to the boundaries I had established. The power dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally, not through confrontation, but through strategic clarity about what each of us truly valued. As I prepared for bed in the guest room that would be my private space during this Manhattan interlude, I realized that cancer had provided an unexpected education in leverage. My illness had initially rendered me vulnerable, dependent on Carter's medical knowledge and financial support. Now, paradoxically, it had created the circumstances through which I could establish new terms for our relationship, his desire for forgiveness and redemption providing the counterweight to my physical dependence. Tomorrow would bring the first of many brutal treatments, cellular warfare waged through intravenous drugs and targeted therapies. Yet as I drifted toward sleep in unfamiliar surroundings, I felt a curious sense of empowerment beneath the physical fragility. The ultimatum I had delivered wasn't just about preserving my dignity within a compromised marriage. It was about reclaiming authority over my experience of illness itself. Cancer might dictate the terms of my physical reality, but it would no longer determine how I navigated the remainder of my life, whether that life spanned decades or merely months. That decision belonged to me alone, a jurisdiction I would defend with the same strategic precision that had built my company and would now rebuild my sense of self, independent of both disease and betrayal. The intensified treatment protocol at Sloan Kettering proved even more grueling than Dr. Patel had prepared me for. 3 times weekly, I endured 4-hour infusions of medications so powerful they required pre-treatment with steroids just to prevent immediate rejection by my system. The cumulative effect transformed my body into an unfamiliar battlefield, my skin developing a grayish undertone, neuropathy numbing my fingertips, and fatigue so profound that the 20-minute walk from bedroom to treatment chair required strategic planning and conservation of energy. Carter maintained his promised role as attentive physician spouse, accompanying me to treatments when his surgical schedule permitted, meticulously tracking my medication regimen, and consulting daily with the research team. True to his word, he had reduced his surgical load significantly, focusing only on cases that couldn't be reassigned. Though I noted these essential surgeries seemed to occur primarily when Alessandra's former pharmaceutical employer had representatives visiting the hospital. We existed in a strange detente within the Manhattan apartment, occupying the same physical space while maintaining careful emotional distance. Our conversations revolved almost exclusively around medical matters and logistical necessities, the deeper questions about our marriage and future remaining unaddressed by mutual unspoken agreement. My physical condition demanded all available energy, leaving little for confronting relationship complexities that had no simple resolution. It was during my 4th week of triple treatments that I met Helena Winters. She occupied the treatment chair beside mine one Tuesday morning, her elegant silver bob and impeccable makeup presenting a striking contrast to the medical setting. While most patients arrived in comfortable clothing optimized for the long treatment hours, Helena wore a beautifully tailored charcoal pantsuit with a vibrant emerald silk blouse, attire more appropriate for a board meeting than chemotherapy. "First time in this chair?" she asked as the nurses prepared our respective IVs, her voice carrying the slight raspiness of either smoking or vocal cord damage from intubation. "First time in this particular chair," I replied. "Not my first treatment." She nodded, assessing me with shrewd blue eyes that missed nothing. "Hepatocellular carcinoma, stage 3 with metastatic presentation." Not a question, but a precise diagnosis. I raised an eyebrow in response. "Your medication protocol is distinctive," she explained with a slight smile. "I've been coming here long enough to recognize the combinations. I'm Helena, by the way. Stage, IV ovarian, 3 recurrences, currently in my 4th round of salvage therapy." "Olivia," I offered. "And salvage therapy sounds like what it is," Helena finished for me. "Last-ditch efforts after standard protocols fail, but I've been in last-ditch territory for 2 years now, which says something about ditches, doesn't it?" Her matter-of-fact approach to terminal illness was refreshing after months of Carter's careful euphemisms and the research team's cautiously optimistic projections. Helena spoke about cancer with the pragmatic clarity of a seasoned executive, discussing market challenges, acknowledged but not surrendered to. "Is your husband parking the car?" she asked, glancing toward the treatment room entrance. "Surgery," I replied automatically. "He's a neurosurgeon at Presbyterian." Helena's expression shifted subtly. "Convenient to have a doctor in the family during all this. Though sometimes I think it's harder for them. Too much knowledge about everything that can go wrong." Before I could respond, a distinguished-looking man in his early 70s entered the treatment area, carrying 2 takeout containers from what I recognized as an exclusive French bistro several blocks away. He approached Helena with a warmth that transcended the clinical setting. "Cassoulet from Lucien," he announced, setting the containers on her side table. "They opened early when I explained it was for you." "Showing off your French again," Helena teased, though her expression softened with genuine affection. "Robert, this is Olivia. She's just starting the triple protocol." Robert extended a hand in formal greeting. "Robert Winters, Moral Support and Food Delivery Service Extraordinaire." "Among other things," Helena added, "former CEO of Winter Pharmaceuticals, current chairman of 3 medical research foundations, and husband of nearly 50 years. The treatment session that followed proved unlike any I had experienced. While most patients retreated into private worlds of discomfort and endurance, Helena engaged me in conversation that ranged from business strategy to fashion to the complexities of navigating serious illness while maintaining professional identity. Robert remained present throughout, contributing occasionally to the discussion, but primarily focused on ensuring Helena's comfort, adjusting her blanket, offering ice chips for the metallic taste that accompanied certain medications, quietly consulting with nurses when new symptoms appeared. Their dynamic fascinated me, a partnership clearly forged through decades of shared experiences and now tempered in the crucible of her illness. Robert's attention never wavered, his concern evident, but never smothering. Helena, despite her obvious physical discomfort, maintained both her dignity and her essential self, the illness changing her circumstances but not her core identity. "How do you do it?" I asked during a lull in our conversation, the question emerging before I could filter it through my usual careful consideration. "Do what, exactly?" Helena countered, her directness matching my own. "Remain so. Yourself. I feel like cancer is erasing me piece by piece, not just physically, but everything I understood about my life." Helena exchanged a glance with Robert, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Cancer certainly clarifies priorities," she replied. "It's an excellent filter for determining what and who really matters." "Some people fail that test," I admitted, the closest I had come to acknowledging Carter's betrayal to anyone outside our marriage. Helena's expression confirmed she understood the unspoken. "Yes, they do. Others surprise you. The question becomes whether you want to spend your limited energy on those who failed or those who didn't." The simple framing of this complex question struck me with unexpected force. I had been allocating significant mental resources to understanding Carter's betrayal, strategizing potential responses, and calculating optimal outcomes for a marriage that might not be salvageable. Meanwhile, my focus on the company I had built, the relationships that sustained me beyond my marriage, and my own needs beyond survival had diminished proportionally. "Your next treatment is Thursday?" Helena asked as nurses prepared to disconnect our respective IVs. I nodded, already dreading the 48 hours of side effects that would precede it. "Good. So is mine. Robert's bringing food from that Vietnamese place on 68th. Enough for two." The invitation, casual yet deliberate, offered something I hadn't realized I needed: connection with someone who truly understood this journey from the inside, whose perspective wasn't clouded by either medical objectivity or emotional entanglement. As Robert helped Helena into her coat with practiced gentleness, he turned to me. "Would you like us to arrange transportation home? Our driver is waiting." "Thank you, but I have a car service," I replied, touched by the offer from these virtual strangers. Helena adjusted her scarf with hands slightly trembling from neuropathy. "Cancer is a club no one wants to join, Olivia, but since we're here, we might as well share the better caterers." Her gallows humor elicited my first genuine laugh in weeks. When Carter arrived at the apartment that evening, I was seated at the Kitchen Island Reviewing Company reports James had forwarded, my first substantive engagement with work in nearly a month. "You seem better today," he observed cautiously, setting down his medical bag. "How was treatment?" "Educational," I replied, not elaborating further. "I'll be connecting with another patient on Thursday. Her husband is bringing lunch." Carter's expression registered surprise at this deviation from my usual isolation during treatment. "That's good. Developing a support network is important." The clinical assessment, rather than personal, response highlighted how thoroughly he had retreated behind professional boundaries. Once, he would have asked about these new acquaintances, shown interest in the connection itself rather than its therapeutic value. "Helena Winters," I added, watching for recognition. It came immediately. "Helena Winters is your treatment companion? The Helena Winters?" Former board member at Sloan Kettering, major donor to cancer research, married to Robert Winters of Winter Pharmaceuticals? I confirmed. "Yes, that Helena." Carter looked genuinely impressed. "She's a legend in medical philanthropy circles. Their foundation funded the Brain Trauma Center where I completed my fellowship." What he didn't say, what perhaps he didn't even consciously register, was that Helena represented potential value beyond personal connection. A woman with her influence could impact careers, facilitate research funding, open doors throughout the medical establishment. The calculation was visible in his expression, professional opportunism momentarily overshadowing the complexities of our personal situation. I found myself studying Carter with new perspective, seeing patterns I had previously attributed to ambition in a different light. What I had once admired as strategic career management now appeared as something less admirable. A tendency to evaluate relationships primarily through the lens of utility and advancement. Had I been assessed through the same calculating gaze? When we first met? Had my own professional success and connections been factors in his decision to pursue our relationship? These questions would have seemed unthinkably cynical before my diagnosis. Now they emerged as natural extensions of my evolving understanding of the man I had married. That night, alone in my bedroom while Carter took call remotely from his study, I reflected on Helena's question about limited energy and where to direct it. The intensity of the Manhattan treatment protocol had forced a ruthless prioritization of physical resources, each day requiring careful decisions about which activities warranted depleting my minimal reserves. Perhaps the same principle should apply to emotional and mental resources as well. The energy I had been dedicating to understanding Carter's betrayal and calculating potential futures for our marriage might be better allocated elsewhere. To my company, to new connections like Helena, to rediscovering aspects of myself obscured by both illness and a relationship that had gradually subsumed my independent identity. This realization didn't constitute a decision about the marriage itself, but rather a shift in immediate focus, from relationship repair to personal reconstruction. Whether Carter and I ultimately remained together or separated became a question, for after my treatment concluded, if I survived to face it, for now, my priority would be reclaiming myself from both cancer and the distorting influence of betrayal. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself looking forward to Thursday's treatment with unexpected anticipation. Helena Winters had entered my life at precisely the moment I needed a different model for navigating illness, one that preserved dignity, authenticity, and agency, even as disease attempted to strip them away. Whether she proved to be merely a treatment companion or something more significant remained to be seen. But the possibility itself represented something I had nearly forgotten during months of medical interventions and marital disintegration. Hope for connection based on mutual recognition rather than utility or obligation. Cancer had narrowed my world to treatment rooms and the Manhattan apartment. Perhaps it was time to begin expanding it again, even within those constraints, by reallocating my limited resources toward growth rather than merely survival. The distinction felt crucial, and entirely my choice to make. My friendship with Helena Winters developed with surprising speed over the following weeks. Our shared treatment schedule created a natural framework for connection, while our similar professional backgrounds, her as former CFO of Winter Pharmaceuticals, before assuming leadership of their foundation, mine as founder and CEO of a wellness technology company, provided common ground beyond cancer. Helena approached illness as she had apparently approached everything in her life, with strategic clarity, unflinching honesty, and a mordant humor that transformed the treatment room. From medical purgatory to something approaching a salon, other patients gradually gravitated toward our corner, drawn by her magnetic combination of vulnerability and strength. Even the medical staff oriented around her presence, research fellows seeking her input on patient experience initiatives, nurses consulting her on improvements to treatment protocols. "You've created a community here," I observed during our 6th shared treatment session, gesturing toward the small group of patients and caregivers now regularly clustering near our chairs. Helena shook her head slightly. "Communities form naturally when people face common challenges. I've just removed the artificial social barriers that prevent connection. Cancer patients waste extraordinary energy maintaining the pretense that they're fighting bravely or staying positive, instead of simply acknowledging how brutal this experience is." "The wellness industrial complex," I acknowledged with irony, given my company's position within that very industry. Positive thinking as medical requirement. Precisely. Though I'd argue the medical establishment benefits more than the wellness industry. Patients channeling energy into maintaining cheerful facades are less likely to question treatment decisions or demand better care options. This perspective, cancer is not just a medical challenge, but a system to be navigated, analyzed, and potentially reformed, resonated deeply with my executive mindset. While Carter and the medical team focused exclusively on my physical response to treatment, Helena engaged with the entire experience: the emotional labor, the institutional barriers, the power dynamics between patients and providers. As January's progressed, my medical status remained frustratingly ambiguous. The triple therapy had halted progression of the satellite lesions, but provided only modest reduction in the primary tumor. The research team described this as disease stabilization, not the dramatic improvement hoped for, but preferable to continued progression. "They're managing expectations," Helena commented when I shared this assessment during one of our post-treatment lunches in her Upper East Side townhouse. Robert had insisted on hosting these recovery sessions, creating a sanctuary where we could process the morning's medical ordeal while enjoying the comfort of non-hospital surroundings. "Isn't that appropriate?" I asked, sipping the ginger tea Robert had prepared specifically to settle post-chemotherapy nausea. "Better than false promises. There's a difference between honest prognosis and constraining possibility," she replied, her shrewd gaze assessing me. "Have you requested your complete file? Not the patient portal summary, but the actual physician notes and research data?" The question surprised me. Despite my initial insistence on treatment partnership with Carter, I had gradually accepted the filtered information provided during formal consultations. I assumed Carter was sharing the relevant details. Helena's expression conveyed volumes without requiring words. She exchanged a glance with Robert, who had been quietly arranging lunch platters of easily digestible foods designed for our compromised systems. "May I speak frankly, Olivia?" Helena asked, though her tone suggested this was more notification than request. "I would expect nothing less. Your husband has a fundamental conflict of interest in your treatment situation. As both spouse and medical professional, he straddles roles that create inherent tensions between emotional attachment and clinical detachment. Add his personal complications." She paused delicately, acknowledging my abbreviated disclosure of Carter's infidelity. "And you have a problematic information filter between you and your medical reality." The assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Despite my initial demands for transparency, I had allowed Carter to resume his role as medical interpreter, accepting his summaries of research results and treatment projections without seeking primary source verification. "What would you suggest?" I asked, recognizing Helena's analysis as constructive rather than critical. "Request complete access to your medical records, not through Carter, but directly from the research team. Have an independent oncologist review the data, and consider what comes next if the triple protocol doesn't produce significant improvement." "Isn't that premature? We're only halfway through the scheduled treatments." Helena's eyes held mine steadily. "In my experience, exploring options from a position of stability is preferable to making decisions during crisis. The physician notes likely contain discussions of contingency plans they haven't yet shared with you." Robert spoke for the first time, his tone gentle but direct. "What Helena's suggesting isn't about abandoning hope, Olivia. It's about expanding your field of vision beyond the narrow treatment path currently presented to you." Their concern prompted me to reconsider how thoroughly I had surrendered medical agency to Carter and the treatment team. Despite my professional reputation for comprehensive information gathering before making business decisions, I had accepted a remarkably constrained information flow regarding my own survival. The following day, I submitted formal requests for my complete medical records from both Greenwich Memorial and Sloan Kettering. Carter discovered the requisition forms on my tablet that evening as we reviewed the week's treatment schedule. "Why are you requesting your complete files?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral, though his expression betrayed concern. "I want comprehensive understanding of my situation," I replied with equal neutrality. "The research summary metrics don't provide adequate context." Carter's posture stiffened slightly. "I've been reviewing all the primary data and consolidating the relevant information for you. The raw files contain technical details that could be unnecessarily alarming without proper interpretation. Perhaps I'd like to form my own interpretations. Based on Helena Winter's suggestion, I assume." His tone carried a hint of dismissal. "Olivia, while Helena's experience with her condition is extensive, every cancer case is unique. Her situation doesn't translate directly to yours." The condescension in his response crystallized exactly what Helena had identified. Carter's role as information gatekeeper had gradually restricted my perspective to the narrow window he deemed appropriate. Whether from protective instinct or more complicated motivations, the effect remained the same: limitation of my autonomy through controlled information. "I've retained Dr. Julia Santos to review my files," I informed him, deliberately casual, as if this were a routine decision rather than a significant reclamation of medical agency. Carter couldn't quite conceal his shock. "Juliana Santos? The surgical oncologist from MD Anderson? Olivia, that's unnecessary and potentially confusing to have another specialist's perspective introduced mid-protocol." "I disagree, and her name is Julia, not Juliana." The correction was minor but pointed. Carter's misidentification of a leading female oncologist revealed both his dismissiveness and unfamiliarity with her work, despite her prominence in the field. The error confirmed my decision to seek independent assessment was correct. "This feels like a vote of no confidence in the current team," Carter said finally, his professional pride evidently wounded. "It's a vote of confidence in my right to comprehensive understanding," I countered. "The team's treatment protocol remains unchanged. I'm simply expanding my information sources." The conversation might have escalated further had Carter's phone not chimed with a hospital emergency requiring his immediate attention. He left with visible frustration, the unresolved tension lingering in the apartment long after the door closed behind him. 2 days later, Helena invited me to tea at her townhouse. Not our usual post-treatment recovery session, but a formal invitation delivered by text for a specific afternoon hour. The unusual formality suggested something beyond our regular conversations was forthcoming. I arrived to find not just Helena and Robert, but 3 additional guests. Dr. Julia Santos herself, whom I recognized from medical journal photographs. A distinguished silver-haired man introduced as Frederick Lattimore, chairman of the Sloan Kettering Board. And a stylish woman in her 60s identified as Victoria Chen, founding partner of Artemis Capital, one of the nation's largest healthcare investment firms. "Olivia," Helena began once pleasantries had been exchanged and tea served in the townhouse's elegant library. "We've asked you here today because we have a proposition that requires your immediate consideration." The seriousness of her tone, coupled with the caliber of assembled guests, indicated this was no casual social gathering. I set down my teacup, giving her my complete attention. "Dr. Santos has reviewed your complete medical file," Helena continued. "She's identified a treatment approach that hasn't been presented to you by your current team, one with potentially significant advantages for your specific tumor profile." Dr. Santos leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Mercer, your cancer exhibits genetic markers that make it potentially responsive to a precision-targeted immunotherapy treatment, currently in advanced trials at 3 research centers nationally. This approach has shown remarkable results in cases similar to yours, particularly when conventional treatments have produced stabilization rather than significant reduction. Why hasn't my team at Sloan Kettering mentioned this option?" I asked, though I suspected the answer even as I posed the question. "The trial is being conducted at competing institutions," Dr. Santos explained diplomatically. While medical ethics should transcend institutional competition, the reality often falls short of the ideal. Frederick Lattimore cleared his throat. What Dr. Santos is too professional to say directly is that your husband's position at Presbyterian and his relationship with Sloan Kettering creates a complex web of institutional loyalties that may be influencing treatment recommendations. The implications were significant, yet aligned with Helena's earlier warnings about conflicting interests. I turned to Victoria Chen, curious about the presence of a healthcare investor in this medical discussion. Understanding my unspoken question, Helena explained. Victoria's firm has been instrumental in funding the immunotherapy research Dr. Santos referenced. The trial protocol requires relocation to Houston for a minimum of 8 weeks, beginning within the next 14 days to optimize your current disease stabilization. The proposition crystallized clearly. Abandon the current Manhattan-based protocol, separate from Carter's medical oversight, and commit to an experimental treatment in Houston under Dr. Santos's care. This is a significant pivot, I observed, processing the implications for both my treatment path and my increasingly tenuous marriage. Helena nodded, her direct gaze conveying understanding of all I wasn't explicitly stating. Significant pivots occasionally offer the best chance for meaningful progress. The question becomes whether the potential benefits outweigh the certainties you would leave behind. This framing, potential benefits versus comfortable certainties, resonated beyond immediate medical considerations. My current treatment offered predictable stability without promising substantial improvement. The Houston option presented greater uncertainty paired with possibility for transformative results. The parallel to my personal situation with Carter wasn't subtle. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, seeking clarity on practical specifics. "A place in the Houston trial, accommodations near the research center, and comprehensive support services," Dr. Santos replied. "If you're interested, I can review the complete protocol details now." I raised a hand slightly. Before we discuss medical specifics, I need to understand why. Not why the treatment might work. I trust Dr. Santos's assessment there. But why this intervention from all of you? I gestured to the assembled group. This level of personal involvement suggests motivations beyond general medical concern. Helena smiled, appreciating the directness of my question. Valid observation. My foundation has invested significantly in this research path. Successful cases accelerate broader application. Your profile, relatively young, previously healthy, with considerable professional resources, makes you an ideal candidate not just medically, but as a potential advocate should the treatment prove successful. So I represent both medical opportunity and potential return on investment, I summarized, not critically, but seeking clarity. You represent the intersection of medical promise and practical impact, Helena corrected gently. Science advances through strategic application as much as pure research. Your case could help bridge that gap. The proposition before me wasn't simply a treatment alternative, but a fundamental realignment of medical approach, physical location, and relationship dynamics. Accepting would mean leaving Carter behind, physically and symbolically, while treatment determined whether our separation would be temporary or permanent. Yet within this complex decision lay something I had been steadily reclaiming since discovering Carter's betrayal: agency over my own path, medical and otherwise. The Houston option represented not just alternative treatment, but assertion of independence, from Carter's medical oversight, from institutional limitations, from the passive patient role I had gradually accepted despite my initial resistance. "I'll need to review the complete protocol details," I said finally, making no commitment but opening the door to serious consideration. Helena nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "That's all we ask for today, the complete information, then your independent decision." As the meeting concluded and farewells were exchanged, Helena held my arm gently, keeping me behind as the others departed. "This isn't just about cancer treatment, Olivia," she said once we were alone. "It's about reclaiming ownership of your life trajectory. Whatever you decide about Houston, remember that distinction." Her insight cut to the heart of my situation. Beyond medical considerations, beyond marital complications, lay the essential question of who would direct my remaining time, whether measured in months or decades. The cancer diagnosis had gradually transferred that direction to medical protocols and Carter's interpretation of them. The Houston proposition, regardless of my ultimate decision, had restored the fundamental understanding that the choice remained, mine to make. I left Helena's townhouse that afternoon with medical documents to review, but also with something more valuable: renewed clarity about the distinction between receiving care and surrendering control. Cancer had temporarily blurred that distinction. The proposition had brought it back into sharp focus. I returned to the Manhattan apartment with Dr. Santos's comprehensive treatment proposal tucked into my handbag, the weight of the document seemingly disproportionate to its physical mass. The alternative pathway it outlined, immunotherapy targeting specific genetic markers in my tumor profile, represented not just a medical divergence, but a life bifurcation point, with profound implications beyond cellular responses and survival. Statistics. Carter was in the kitchen when I arrived, an unusual occurrence given his typically late hospital hours. He had prepared dinner, another rarity in our recent routine, and arranged place settings at the small table by the window, overlooking the city lights. "You're home," he observed, an edge of accusation beneath the simple statement. "I've been trying to reach you." I set my bag down carefully. I had my phone on silent during a meeting. A meeting. He repeated the words with subtle emphasis. "With Helena Winters, I presume?" The defensive note in his voice confirmed my suspicion that he had made inquiries after discovering my medical records request. Carter's professional network gave him access to information channels I couldn't track. Conversations in hospital corridors, text exchanges with colleagues, institutional gossip that inevitably circulated through medical communities. "Yes, with Helena," I confirmed without elaboration. "Dinner looks thoughtful. What's the occasion?" Carter hesitated, his rehearsed approach clearly disrupted by my calm acknowledgement of the meeting he'd already discovered. "I thought we should talk about your treatment progress, next steps. The research team is encouraged by the disease stabilization." "Disease stabilization isn't remission," I noted, taking a seat at the table but leaving the folder in my bag. "It's essentially a stalemate." "In advanced hepatocellular carcinoma, stabilization represents significant victory," Carter countered, slipping into his clinical voice as he served the carefully prepared meal. Poached salmon with steamed vegetables, food selected for compatibility with my compromised digestive system. Many patients never achieve that benchmark. The statement was technically accurate yet fundamentally evasive, focusing on relative progress rather than absolute outcomes. I had encountered similar framing in business contexts when projects underperformed against original projections but could be positioned as successes against reduced expectations. "What are the projections if we continue the current protocol?" I asked directly. Not compared to statistical averages for similar cases, but specific to my situation. Carter's hesitation was brief but telling. "The team believes continued stabilization is the most likely outcome, with incremental tumor reduction possible over extended treatment cycles." "And survival prognosis under that scenario?" His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Prognosis becomes more favorable with each cycle that maintains stabilization. We're building a foundation for potential long-term management." The careful language, management rather than cure, potential rather than expected, contained volumes of unspoken qualification. Carter was outlining a future of indefinite treatment, perpetual medical intervention, with survival measured in incremental extensions rather than restoration of health. "I've been presented with an alternative treatment approach," I said, deciding. Direct disclosure was preferable to prolonged tactical conversation. Dr. Julia Santos has reviewed my case and recommended a precision immunotherapy protocol currently in trial at MD Anderson. Carter's expression shifted from surprise to professional, interest to guarded concern in rapid succession. Julia Santos? She's certainly respected in surgical oncology, but her immunotherapy work is considered somewhat experimental by mainstream oncology standards. The trial results appear promising for cases with my specific genetic markers, I countered. Particularly for patients who've achieved stabilization but not significant reduction through conventional approaches. Carter set down his fork, food forgotten as the conversation shifted from theoretical to immediate. Olivia, changing protocols mid-treatment carries significant risks. The current approach has successfully halted progression. Introducing a new treatment modality could disrupt that stability. Or it could transform stability into actual improvement, I replied evenly. Dr. Santos believes my tumor profile makes me an ideal candidate for this approach. Based on a paper review of your records, Carter noted dismissively. Not direct clinical observation or consultation with your current team. The criticism might have seemed reasonable from a purely medical perspective, yet it conveniently overlooked how institutional affiliations and professional networks influence treatment recommendations. Carter's automatic defense of the current protocol reflected not just medical caution, but the intricate web of professional relationships and institutional loyalties Helena had identified. The Houston trial has a treatment slot available, I continued, watching his reaction carefully. It would require relocating there for a minimum of 8 weeks, beginning within the next 2 weeks. The implications registered immediately. Houston? Olivia, that's completely unnecessary. If you're interested in immunotherapy approaches, I can explore options within the Sloan Kettering network that wouldn't require relocation or disruption of your current care team. According to Dr. Santos, the specific protocol showing highest efficacy for my genetic markers isn't available within this network, I replied. The decision isn't about geographic convenience, but optimal treatment matching. Carter's expression, hardened professional disagreement merging with personal concern, or perhaps control. This feels rushed and reactionary. Major treatment decisions shouldn't be made based on a single outside consultation, especially one facilitated by someone with Helena Winter's clear institutional biases. Helena's foundation supports research across multiple institutions, I corrected him. Her interest is in treatment efficacy, not institutional politics. Everyone has agendas, Olivia. His tone carried a patronizing edge I might once have overlooked, but now registered with crystalline clarity. Helena's foundation has investment priorities. Santos has research protocols needing subjects. These influence recommendations, consciously or not. The observation wasn't entirely without merit, yet it conveniently ignored the equally powerful influence of Carter's own institutional affiliations and professional relationships on his treatment oversight. His automatic positioning of himself as objective arbiter while questioning others' motivations revealed a blind spot I had once shared, but now saw with uncomfortable clarity. I'm considering the Houston option seriously, I said finally, my tone conveying this wasn't a negotiation but a notification. I've scheduled a video consultation with Dr. Santos and her team for tomorrow morning to discuss protocol specifics. Carter stood abruptly, abandoning pretense of a normal dinner conversation. This is Helena's influence. She's leveraging your vulnerability during illness to pursue her foundation's research agenda. Or she's offering access to treatment options I wouldn't otherwise know existed, I countered calmly. Options your team hasn't presented despite their potential relevance to my case. Because those options represent unproven approaches with significant risks. My priority has been protecting you from false hope and experimental protocols with limited evidence basis. The declaration crystallized the fundamental issue underlying our increasingly strained interactions during my treatment. Carter had indeed been filtering my medical information, not from malice, but from a paternalistic determination to protect me from options he deemed too risky or uncertain. This protection, however well-intentioned, had effectively restricted my agency in making fully informed decisions about my own survival. "I don't need protection from information or options," I said quietly. "I need comprehensive understanding to make my own choices." Carter's expression shifted, recognizing the deeper implications beneath our medical disagreement. "And if those choices include leaving for Houston? Leaving our treatment team? Leaving?" He didn't complete the sentence, the personal dimension remaining implicit yet unmistakable. "That decision hasn't been made," I replied honestly. "I'm gathering complete information before determining next steps." He studied me with the analytical gaze that had likely served him well in clinical assessment, but now felt inappropriately clinical in our personal context. "This isn't just about medical protocols, is it? It's about us, about what happened with Alessandra." The direct reference to his affair, the first time either of us had explicitly named it in weeks, shifted the conversation's temperature. We had maintained a careful detente in the Manhattan apartment, medical cooperation overlaying personal betrayal without addressing the fundamental fractures in our relationship. "My medical decisions and our marital situation are separate considerations," I said, though we both recognize the artificial nature of this distinction. The Houston option represented both medical alternative and potential exit path from a marriage compromised by infidelity, now further strained by divergent approaches to my treatment. "Are they?" Carter challenged. "Because it seems remarkably convenient that Helena Winters has presented an option requiring immediate geographic separation, just as we've established a functional treatment routine here." The implication that I might prioritize marital consequences over medical efficacy sparked genuine anger, my first fully experienced emotion beyond calm strategic calculation since discovering his affair. "Do you honestly believe I would make cancer treatment decisions based on relationship dynamics rather than survival optimization?" Carter had the grace to look momentarily abashed. "No, but I believe external influences are affecting your judgment during an incredibly vulnerable time." The most significant external influence on my judgment was discovering my husband had established a parallel relationship while I underwent chemotherapy, I replied, my tone even despite the cutting content. That experience tends to clarify priorities rather dramatically. The statement hung between us, its truth too fundamental for Carter to dispute, despite his evident desire to redirect focus to medical considerations rather than his personal failures. He moved to the apartment's wall of windows, creating physical distance that mirrored our emotional separation. "I don't want you to leave," he said finally, his back still turned, medically or otherwise. The simple declaration contained multiple layers: professional concern, personal attachment, fear of both medical complications and relationship dissolution. Yet beneath these, I detected something more fundamental: resistance to losing control of a situation he had managed primarily through his medical authority and institutional connections. "My decision will be based on comprehensive assessment of treatment options and potential outcomes," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting his implicit plea. "I'll review Dr. Santos's complete protocol with independent analysis before determining next steps." Carter turned back toward me, his expression reflecting recognition that our dynamic had fundamentally shifted, from physician guiding patient to equals with divergent perspectives, from husband directing medical decisions to separated partners approaching fork in shared path. "Whatever you decide about Houston," he said quietly, "I hope you'll consider that meaningful reconciliation requires physical presence. Some distances can't be bridged remotely." The observation held truth I couldn't dismiss, yet also subtle: manipulation in its framing of the decision as primarily relationship determinative rather than medical. Carter was essentially suggesting that choosing Houston meant choosing divorce. a binary framing that attempted to lever emotional attachment against medical self-determination. As I prepared for bed that night, reviewing Dr. Santos's detailed protocol on my tablet, I recognized that the Houston decision had crystallized something essential about my cancer journey and simultaneous marital dissolution. Both processes had gradually transferred power to external authorities, oncologists determining treatment protocols, Carter interpreting medical information, respective attorneys eventually negotiating separation terms. The Houston option represented reclamation of agency in both domains simultaneously. Whether I ultimately chose the immunotherapy trial or remained with the current protocol, the decision-making process itself had restored my central role in determining my path forward, medically, personally, and otherwise. This recognition brought unexpected clarity and calm as I weighed complex factors across medical efficacy, practical logistics, and personal implications. The decision wasn't simply about cellular response rates or institutional affiliations, but about fundamental orientation toward my remaining life, whether measured in months or decades. Did I want that life directed primarily by institutional protocols and Carter's filtered interpretation? Or was I prepared to assume both the responsibility and freedom of charting my own course through uncertain terrain? By morning, my decision had solidified with surprising certainty. Whatever came next, innovative treatment success, complicated medical setbacks, marital dissolution, or eventual reconciliation, would unfold according to my conscious choices, rather than passive acceptance of paths determined by others' priorities and perspectives. Cancer had temporarily suspended my autonomy. Carter's betrayal had challenged my agency. Both had obscured the fundamental truth that now emerged with crystalline clarity. Even with disease colonizing my body and uncertainty clouding my future, the direction of my life remained mine to determine. The decision about Houston represented the first conscious step toward reclaiming that determination, not just for treatment protocols, but for everything that followed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.